He held her waist tightly, pulling her closer. "Don't resist. This is how to unlock God's blessings in your life," Daddy Miracle said to Mercy during a special prayer. "I believe I could pray to God on my own, but my mother thought differently." To her, Pastor John Joshua, also known as Daddy Miracle, is God's messenger on earth. She trusted him completely, dragging me to his church for prayers and prophecies. When I told her I could pray by myself, she called me stubborn and insisted I meet him for a special session. I didn't want to, but I obeyed her. That day changed everything. This is many girls' story. The House of Divine Miracles Church was a grand building. It wasn't just a place of worship. It was the pride of Lagos. Every Sunday, crowds filled the seats, eager to see Daddy Miracle. He wasn't like other preachers. With his fancy suits, shiny shoes, and convoy of luxury cars, he was both a man of God and a celebrity. Women admired him, calling him Daddy with deep respect. They spoke of his anointing, often giving him more honor than they gave their husbands. Even men sought his advice for their businesses and families. Daddy Miracle was known for solving problems, especially for those who could pay his fees. The church auditorium buzzed with excitement as the choir delivered powerful songs. Daddy Miracle walked in, his presence commanding attention. He climbed the pulpit, holding the microphone with authority. "Today," he declared, "God is about to do something wonderful. Your lives will never be the same again." The congregation shouted aloud, "Amen." The service at the House of Divine Miracles was as vibrant as always. The choir had just concluded their energetic worship when Mama Mercy approached Daddy Miracle after the service. Her 14-year-old daughter, Mercy, stood beside her, clutching her purse nervously. "Daddy, please, I need you to pray for my daughter," Mama Mercy began. "She just finished her NECO exams and is hoping to gain admission into the university soon." Daddy Miracle smiled warmly, his charm pulling them in. "Ah, my daughter," he said, turning to Mercy. "God has big plans for you. Step forward." Mercy reluctantly stepped forward. Daddy Miracle placed his hand on her head, murmuring a series of prayers. When he finished, he stood upright and addressed her directly. "Come back later, my daughter. I need to perform a special prayer for your breakthrough. God is about to open doors for you." Mama Mercy's face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, Daddy. We will come back." At home, Mercy sat quietly in the living room corner while her mother prepared dinner. The day's events consumed her thoughts. "Mama," she started hesitantly, "I don't think I need to go back to Daddy Miracle for the prayer. I can pray by myself and God will still hear me." Mama Mercy paused her water leaf chopping and turned to face her daughter with a stern expression. "What are you saying, Mercy? Do you think you know God better than Daddy Miracle? He's a man of God. His prayers are faster and more effective." "But Mama," Mercy tried to explain, "I believe if I pray sincerely, God will listen." Mama Mercy waved her hand dismissively. "You're just being stubborn. Teenagers these days think they know everything. Tomorrow you will go back to Daddy Miracle for the prayer. That's final." Mercy sighed, knowing it was pointless to argue further. Quietly, she returned to her room, her heart heavy with unease. The next day, Mercy went back to the church as her mother had instructed. One of the ushers welcomed her and led her to Daddy Miracle's office. "Ah, my daughter, welcome," Daddy Miracle said, rising from his luxurious chair. His smile was wide, but there was something unsettling in his eyes that Mercy couldn't quite figure out. "Sit down," he said, motioning to the chair opposite him. Mercy sat nervously, gripping her bag tightly. "God revealed something to me about you," Daddy Miracle began. "Your destiny is very bright, but there are forces trying to stop you. That's why I need to pray for you in a special way." Mercy nodded hesitantly, unsure of what to say. "Come closer," he instructed. Reluctantly, Mercy stood and moved closer to his desk. What followed changed her life forever. Daddy Miracle's demeanor shifted. His voice, once calm, turned commanding. He grabbed her, and before Mercy could process what was happening, he had his way with her. After it was over, He adjusted his tie and straightened his chair as if nothing had happened. Mercy, however, sat trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Listen to me," Daddy Miracle said firmly. "You must never speak of this. If you do, you will bring a curse upon yourself and your family. Do you understand?" Mercy nodded numbly, unable to speak. She walked out of his office as if in a daze, her mind spinning. Upon her return home, Mercy had become a completely different person. Her mother noticed her quietness but dismissed it as normal teenage behavior. "Mercy, how was the prayer session?" Mama Mercy asked casually while cooking. Mercy hesitated, her lips trembling. "Mama, something happened." Mama Mercy glanced at her briefly. "What is it? Speak up." Mercy tried to find the words. "Mama, I don't think Daddy Miracle is who he claims to be." Before she could finish, Mama Mercy slammed her cooking spoon on the kitchen table. "Mercy, what are you trying to say? That a whole man of God is not real? Do you want to bring a curse upon this house?" "Mama, please, just hear me out," Mercy begged. He did something to me." "Keep quiet," her mother snapped, anger flaring in her voice. "I don't want to hear any of this nonsense. You don't like church, and now you're making up stories. You're too young to understand spiritual things. Go to your room and stop talking rubbish." Mercy's heart sank. She wanted to cry, to make her mother believe her, but Mama Mercy had already dismissed her, returning to her cooking. The following Sunday, Daddy Miracle's prophetic powers were on full display. He scanned the congregation as though searching for someone. His eyes finally rested on a young woman in the middle row. "You there, the sister in the yellow dress. Stand up," he called. The woman, visibly nervous, stood up. "Yes, Daddy." "What is your name?" "My name is Sade, sir," she replied, her voice trembling. "Sade," Daddy Miracle began, "the Lord is showing me something about your life. You've been struggling with relationships, is that correct?" Sade's eyes widened in shock. "Yes, Daddy, it's true." "You've been praying for a husband, but nothing seems to work. Am I right?" "Yes, Daddy," Sade said, her voice cracking as tears rolled down her face. Sade walked to the altar, and Daddy Miracle laid his hand on her head. "I break every chain of delay in your life. Your husband will find you. After this service, come to my office. There's a special prayer I need to do for you." The congregation clapped and cheered as Sade knelt, overwhelmed. Later in the service, Daddy Miracle turned his attention to an elegant woman seated at the front. She was Mrs. Adana, the wife of a prominent businessman known for her wealth and her impeccable style. "You, my daughter, Mrs. Adana, stand up," he called. She stood gracefully, a polite smile on her face. "Yes, Daddy." "The Lord has revealed something about your marriage," Daddy Miracle said, his tone serious. "There is trouble in your home. Your husband has not been faithful." Mrs. Adana's expression changed, her smile fading. "Daddy, is that true?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Yes, my daughter," Daddy Miracle replied. "But don't worry, God will fight for you. After the service, come to my office for counseling." The congregation murmured in awe, impressed by Daddy Miracle's ability to see what others could not. After the service, people lined up outside Daddy Miracle's luxurious office. The room was adorned with gold-plated furniture and framed photos of him with prominent figures. Sade was the first to be called in. She sat nervously across from him, clutching her handbag. "My daughter," Daddy Miracle began, "you are special. That's why the enemy has been fighting your relationships. But don't worry, I will personally pray for you. Sow a seed of faith and your breakthrough will come." "Thank you, Daddy," Sade said, reaching into her bag to hand over an envelope filled with cash. Next, Mrs. Adana entered. Daddy Miracle welcomed her with a warm smile. "My daughter, the enemy wants to destroy your home, but with prayer we will prevail." "Thank you, Daddy," she replied, tears filling her eyes. Before she left, Daddy Miracle handed her a bottle of anointed oil. "Use this to anoint your home. And remember, Always support God's work with your resources. On Sundays, Daddy Miracle always concluded his sermons with a powerful message about wealth and prosperity. God desires his children to prosper, he declared from the pulpit. Look at me, I am living proof. Sow into this ministry, and you too shall prosper. The congregation erupted in cheers, with many rushing to the altar to lay money at his feet. But they did not know that Daddy Miracle was no longer the humble servant of God he once was. His focus had shifted from saving souls to building a personal empire. Women swarmed around him, and he relished the influence he wielded over their lives. Weeks turned into months, and Mercy found herself stuck in a pattern she couldn't escape. Every time she was summoned to Daddy Miracle's office, her fear grew, but she felt powerless to resist. At home, she tried several times to open up to her mother, but Mama Mercy's unshakable faith in Daddy Miracle made it impossible. Mercy, her mother would say, if you don't want God's blessings, just say so. Stop speaking rubbish about a man of God. Mercy gave up trying. She buried her pain deep inside, her once bright eyes now dull and lifeless. One Sunday, after yet another encounter with Daddy Miracle, Mercy returned home and locked herself in her room. She stood before her mirror, staring at the reflection of someone she barely recognized. She sat down and picked up her journal, pouring her emotions into words she couldn't dare to say aloud. Another Sunday at the House of Divine Miracles was just as lively as ever. The choir sang with passion, the congregation clapped and danced, and Daddy Miracle stood tall at the pulpit, preaching about divine favor. His words mesmerized the crowd, and after the service, people lined up outside his office for personal prayers and counseling. Among them was Mama Aisha, a respected church member, accompanied by her daughter, Ada. Ada was a bright 17-year-old, an ambitious girl, preparing to travel abroad for her studies. She had been working on her visa for weeks, and Mama Aisha was confident that Daddy Miracle's prayers would make the process smooth. Daddy, please pray for my daughter, Mama Aisha said as they entered his office. She has worked so hard for this visa, and we need God to make everything work smoothly. Daddy Miracle nodded with a glowing smile. Ah, my daughter Ada, God has mighty plans for you. Let us pray. He placed his hand on Ada's head and prayed fervently, calling down blessings and favor. Mama Aisha, moved by his prayer, knelt beside her daughter, tears streaming down her face. When he finished, Daddy Miracle turned to Ada. My daughter, there is more we need to address. God has revealed to me that certain forces are working to block your success. Come back later in the week for a special prayer, and we will handle it. Mama Aisha nodded eagerly. Thank you, Daddy. We will return. As instructed by her mother, Ada went back to the church a few days later. She was nervous but reassured herself it was just another prayer session. She was ushered into Daddy Miracle's office. Ah, my daughter, welcome, he greeted her warmly. Are you ready to receive your divine breakthrough? Yes, sir, Ada replied, forcing a smile. Good. Sit down, he said, pointing to the chair across from him. Ada sat nervously, clutching her bag tightly. Daddy Miracle began to speak in a low, soothing tone, explaining the spiritual battles she was facing and assuring her that his prayers would guarantee the success of her visa application. Stand up, Daddy Miracle said suddenly. Ada rose, confused but obedient. He moved closer and placed his hands on her shoulders, muttering a prayer. Then, without warning, his demeanor changed. He grabbed her waist, pulling her closer, his intentions now unmistakable. Daddy, what are you doing? Ada asked, trying to break free. Shh, he whispered to her as he tightened his grip. This is for your divine breakthrough. Don't resist the work of God. Before Ada could protest any further, he had his way with her. When it was all over, she was in shock, tears streaming down her cheeks. Listen to me, Daddy Miracle said as he was adjusting his tie. You must not tell anyone about this. I have just released blessings upon your life. Your visa will be approved if you obey this. But if you don't, you'll never get your visa approved. and a curse will be upon your family. Do you understand? Ada nodded numbly, unable to speak. Just as she began dressing, the door swung open. Standing in the doorway was Mrs. Joy Joshua, Daddy Miracle's wife. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene, Ada's disheveled look and her husband's guilt. "John, what is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger and disbelief. "My dear, it's not what it looks like," Daddy Miracle stammered, his confidence replaced by panic. "What do you mean it is not what it looks like?" she asked, her voice rising. "I just walked in on you with a young girl here in the house of God." Ada, still shaking, trying to slip past Mrs. Joshua, but the woman stopped her. "Wait, my dear. Are you okay? What happened?" Before Ada could respond, Daddy Miracle interjected. "Joy, please, let her go. I'll explain everything." Mrs. Joshua hesitated. Her face was mixed with anger and confusion. She finally stepped aside, and Ada rushed out of the office. Once the door closed, Mrs. Joshua turned to her husband. "What have you done, John? Do you realize the shame this could bring to the church and to our family?" Daddy Miracle slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "It was the devil, Joy. I don't know what came over me. Please forgive me. You must not tell anyone." Mrs. Joshua's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. "You expect me to keep quiet? This is disgraceful, John." "Joy, please." He knelt and pleaded, reaching for her hand. "If this comes out, everything we've built will be destroyed. Think of the church, the congregation. They depend on me." Mrs. Joshua pulled her hand away, her face etched with disappointment. "This is not the man I married. I don't even recognize you anymore." "It was a mistake," he insisted. "I'll pray for forgiveness, and I know God will forgive me. But you must help me keep this secret." After a long pause, Mrs. Joshua reluctantly nodded. "Fine, but this can never happen again. If I catch you doing this to another girl, I will not keep quiet." "Thank you, Joy," he said, exhaling deeply. Despite the tension at home, life at the House of Divine Miracles continued as usual. Daddy Miracle preached with the same vigor, his voice booming as he spoke of blessings and prosperity. The congregation remained oblivious to the shadows lurking behind the scenes. Women continued to flock to his office for prayers, men sought his advice, and donations poured in. However, for Ada, life was far from being normal. She tried to process what had happened, her once vibrant spirit now weighed down by confusion and shame. She avoided her mother's questions, too scared to speak out. Meanwhile, Mrs. Joshua kept a close watch on her husband. Her trust in him was completely shattered. She kept his secret, but her heart was heavy with guilt. Daddy Miracle, on the other hand, carried on as if nothing had happened, convincing himself that he'd been forgiven. But deep down, he knew the facade was cracking and that the truth would eventually surface. One Sunday, during another power-packed service, Mercy sat quietly in a corner of the church. Her mind clouded with despair, and her heart was heavy. Each Sunday became harder for her to live through. She looked at her mother, who clapped and sang enthusiastically, immersed in the service. Mercy wanted to tell her everything, to unburden herself of the terrible secret she'd been carrying. But each time she tried, her mother dismissed her, not willing to hear anything against Daddy Miracle. A prisoner in a world that didn't value her voice, she felt stuck. That evening, Mercy locked herself in her room after church. She sat on the floor, clutching her journal, the only place where she could pour out her pain. Tears flowed as she scribbled words she couldn't say aloud, her anguish filling the pages. At last, incapable of carrying the burden of her trauma, Mercy reached under her bed and retrieved a small bottle of pills from her mother's cabinet. With trembling hands, she unscrewed the cap, poured the pills into her palm and stared at them. "This is the only way," she whispered. Swallowing them in one swift motion, she lay back on her bed, clutching her journal to her chest. As her breathing grew shallow, her tears slowly dried. Later that night, Mama Mercy noticed something was wrong. Mercy didn't come out for dinner. Her mother called Mercy, but she didn't answer. Worried, she opened the door and froze. Mercy lay motionless on the bed, her face pale, the empty bottle of pills on the floor. "No, no, no, no!" Mama Mercy screamed, rushing to her daughter's side. She shook her, hoping for her to wake up. "Mercy, wake up! Please, baby, wake up!" Mercy, however, did not move. Mama Mercy's trembling hands reached for the journal clutched in Mercy's lifeless hands. As she read its contents, her eyes widened with every word. The weight of the truth crashed down on her. "Daddy Miracle," she whispered, her voice cracking. The prayers, the visits, the warnings to stay silent, it was all there. Mama Mercy's sobs filled the room as she clutched the journal. How could I have been so blind? My own daughter, I failed her. Mama Mercy's grief turned to despair as she stared at the journal. It held the damning truth, but what could she do? Who would believe her? Daddy Miracle was revered by everyone, including herself. "If I tell anyone, they'll call me a liar," she muttered. "They'll say Mercy hated church and made it all up. They'll say I'm trying to destroy a man of God." Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. She wanted justice for Mercy, but feared the backlash. That night, she made a decision. She cleaned the scene, erasing any link to Daddy Miracle. She locked the journal away, hiding the key. When neighbors came the next day to offer condolences, Mama Mercy told them it was an unfortunate accident, blaming evil spirits. The church held a small service for Mercy, where Daddy Miracle offered words of comfort. "The devil works in mysterious ways," he said somberly, "but we must remain steadfast in faith." Mama Mercy stared at him from her seat, her heart filled with rage. She wanted to scream the truth, to expose him for who he truly was. But she stayed silent, her grief a burden she would carry alone for the rest of her days. Mama Mercy stopped going to Daddy Miracle's church. She could not bear to see him preach another sermon ever again. This is the story of most girls and their parents, afraid to tell the truth because nobody believed them. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more interesting stories.